Have you ever loved someone so fiercely that your soul felt irrevocably tied to theirs, only to discover you were nothing but a convenient placeholder? She didn't scream. She didn't shed a single tear when she heard her alpha confess his truth. She simply packed her bags and vanished into the winter night. The great hall of Ironcrest Keep was alive with the roaring heat of massive stone hearths and the raucous laughter of 100 hardened warriors. Tapestries depicting legendary wolf hunts fluttered against the drafty, ancient walls. At the high table sat Aveline, the Luna of the Ironcrest pack. She was a vision of quiet strength in a gown of deep emerald velvet, a silver diadem resting atop her raven hair. To her left sat Alpha Cedric, a man whose broad shoulders and piercing amber eyes commanded absolute loyalty from his people. To the untrained eye, they were the perfect rulers. A true mate pair destined by the goddess herself. But Aveline's journey to this throne had not been paved with roses. It had been forged in the desperate fires of necessity. 3 years ago, the Ironcrest pack was on the brink of starvation, their lands ravaged by a brutal, unyielding winter. Aveline was the daughter of Lord Ewan of the Riverlands, a lesser werewolf faction rich in agriculture but weak in military might. Cedric had ridden into her father's courtyard, a desperate alpha seeking grain and cattle. In exchange, he offered the absolute protection of his ferocious warriors, but treaties required blood to bind them. Cedric claimed Aveline as his mate, taking her back to the harsh mountainous terrain of the north. Aveline had embraced her role with a fierce devotion. She had not initially loved the cold, brooding alpha, but she respected him. Over the years, as they rebuilt the keep together, as she tended to the wounded after border skirmishes and sat by his side during long, ruling pack councils, respect had blossomed into a profound, bone-deep love. She believed Cedric felt the same. He was fiercely protective, gentle with her in the dark quiet of their chambers, and trusted her judgment above all others. Or so she thought. The illusion began to fracture on the night of the winter solstice feast. The heavy oak doors of the great hall swung open, letting in a swirl of blinding white snow, and with it the visiting dignitaries from the High Ridge pack. Leading them was Lord Alastair, but it was the woman beside him who made the room hold its collective breath. Genevieve. She was the daughter of a duke, a pureblood werewolf of impeccable lineage. Her hair was spun gold, her eyes a striking ice blue, and she moved with the liquid grace of a predator who knew she owned every room she walked into. But it wasn't her beauty that made the hair on the back of Aveline's neck stand up. It was the way Cedric looked at her. For a fleeting second, the stoic, impenetrable alpha of Ironcrest looked as though someone had struck him across the chest. His amber eyes widened, his jaw clenched, and his grip on his silver goblet tightened until his knuckles turned white. Alpha Cedric, Genevieve purred, stepping forward and offering a deep, flawless curtsy. It has been far too long. High Ridge brings greetings and a renewal of our ancient alliances. Lady Genevieve, Cedric replied, his voice uncharacteristically thick. He stood, stepping around the high table to greet her. He did not look back at Aveline. You are a welcome sight in Ironcrest. Aveline watched the exchange with a calm, unreadable expression. As Luna, it was her duty to remain poised, a pillar of stability for her pack. She instructed her handmaiden, Lady Margaret, to repair the finest guest chambers and personally ensured the High Ridge wolves were supplied with hot spiced wine and roasted meats. But throughout the evening, a heavy, suffocating weight settled over Aveline's chest. She noticed the subtle things, the way Cedric's ear twitched to track the sound of Genevieve's laughter across the hall, the way his beta, Leaf, cast nervous, sidelong glances at Aveline whenever Cedric and Genevieve found themselves standing too close. Aveline knew the whispers of the past. Before the famine, before the Riverlands Treaty, there had been rumors of a courtship between Cedric and Genevieve. At High Ridge was a wealthy pack, and Lord Alastair had refused to wed his prized daughter to an alpha whose lands were dying. Cedric had been forced to look elsewhere. He had been forced to look at Aveline. Luna, Leif's voice broke through her reverie. The beta stood beside her chair, shifting his weight uncomfortably. He was a good man, scarred from battle and fiercely loyal to Cedric, but Aveline had always considered him a friend. The feast is progressing well. You have outdone yourself. Thank you, Leif, Aveline said softly, her eyes tracking Cedric as he poured a cup of wine for Genevieve, his head tilted to listen to something she was whispering. Though I fear the Alpha's attention is required elsewhere tonight. Leif followed her gaze and cleared his throat, a flush creeping up his neck. He is merely entertaining our guests, Luna. Politics. You know how it is. I do, Aveline replied, taking a slow sip of her water. I know exactly how politics work. As the hours dragged on, the air in the great hall grew stifling. The music of the lutes and drums pounded against Aveline's skull. Cedric had barely spoken 2 words to her since the High Ridge wolves arrived. It wasn't the blatant disrespect that hurt. It was the realization of how effortlessly she had been cast into the shadows the moment a ghost from his past materialized in the flesh. Shortly past midnight, Cedric murmured something to Leif, and the 2 men slipped out of the great hall through a side corridor that led to the military wing. Aveline watched them go. The storm outside was intensifying, the wind howling like a wounded beast against the stone walls. Cedric had left his heavy fur cloak draped over the back of his massive wooden chair. Acting on a simple, wife-like instinct, Aveline picked up the heavy wolf pelt cloak. The corridors of the military wing were notoriously drafty, and Cedric had been coughing earlier in the week. She excused herself from the high table, nodding gracefully to the remaining lords and ladies, and made her way toward the armory. The stone corridors were blissfully quiet, a stark contrast to the overwhelming noise of the feast. Aveline's soft leather slippers made no sound against the flagstones. The flickering torches cast long dancing shadows against the walls. As she approached the heavy oak doors of the armory, she noticed they were slightly ajar, a sliver of golden candlelight spilling out onto the cold floor. She raised her hand to push the door open, the heavy fur cloak draped securely over her forearm. You are playing a dangerous game, Cedric. Leif's voice stopped her dead in her tracks. It wasn't the casual tone of a beta speaking to an alpha. It was the tense, urgent hiss of a man trying to talk his brother off a ledge. I am playing no game, Leif, Cedric's voice replied. It sounded exhausted, rough around the edges. I am entertaining an ally. Nothing more. Do not insult my intelligence, Leif snapped, the sound of metal clinking echoing in the room, as if he were anxiously rearranging weapons on a table. I saw the way you looked at her. Half the pack saw it. More importantly, Aveline saw it. Aveline's breath caught in her throat. A hand hovered an inch from the wood of the door. She knew she should walk away. She knew that eavesdropping rarely brought anything but pain. But her feet felt rooted to the stone, heavy as lead. Cedric let out a long, heavy sigh. It was a sound of profound burden. Aveline is a pragmatic woman. She understands the nature of our world. She knows what is required to keep alliances strong. She is your mate, Cedric. Leif argued, his voice rising in disbelief. She is your Luna. She pulled this pack back from the brink of starvation. She healed your warriors. She built this keep into a fortress. You owe her your loyalty, not just your respect. Silence stretched in the armory. Aveline's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, caged bird. She waited for Cedric to agree. She waited for the man she had loved, the man she had poured her soul into for 3 years, to defend her, to say that he loved her, that Genevieve was the past, and she was his present. When Cedric finally spoke, his voice was quiet, stripped of all alpha bravado. It was the terrifying, naked sound of absolute truth. I owe her my gratitude, Leif, Cedric said slowly. And she has it. She will always have it. She is a magnificent Luna, and I do not regret the treaty with the Riverlands. It saved our people, but... Leif pressed, dread lacing his tone. "But—" Cedric's voice cracked slightly. "She was never really my choice. You know that. Everyone knows that. When Lord Alistair turned me away, when he denied me Genevieve, I was desperate. My people were dying. I needed the Riverlands grain. I did what I had to do to survive." Evelyn felt a physical sensation in her chest, a sharp, icy snapping, as if a frozen branch had just been broken in two. "Goddess, Cedric," Leif breathed out. "You cannot mean that. The the bond was forged by duty, not by the soul," Cedric interrupted, his tone growing defensive, almost desperate. "I care for Evelyn. I swear to you I do. But when Genevieve walked through those doors tonight," Leif, my wolf, howled. "It was like waking up from a 3-year sleep. Genevieve was supposed to be mine. She is the one I wanted. Evelyn was a survival tactic. A survival tactic." The words echoed in Evelyn's mind, deafeningly loud. A survival tactic, not a mate, not an equal, not a beloved wife. A bag of grain, a shield against the winter. A convenient, useful tool to keep the Ironcrest pack alive until the true queen could return. Most women would have burst into the room. Most women would have screamed, thrown the heavy cloak in his face and demanded answers. A werewolf scorned was a terrifying thing. Plates would be smashed, claws would be bared, tears of rage and heartbreak would flood the stone floors. Evelyn did none of these things. She stood perfectly still in the dark corridor. She waited for the tears to come, for the familiar sting behind her eyes that accompanied pain. But nothing happened. There was no overwhelming wave of sorrow. Instead, a terrifying, absolute cold washed over her. It started in her fingertips and spread inward, freezing her heart, crystallizing her emotions into pure, unadulterated logic. She had spent 3 years breaking her back for a man who looked at her as a charity case. She had compromised her own youth, left her family, and bled for a pack that would always see her as second best in the eyes of their alpha. She looked down at the heavy fur cloak draped over her arm. It was a symbol of her care, of her constant, unwavering devotion to a man who did not want it. Very carefully, moving with deliberate silence, Evelyn folded the cloak and placed it neatly on a wooden bench outside the armory door. She didn't want him to catch a chill after all. Aluna always cared for her alpha. Then she turned around and walked away. She did not return to the Great Hall. She did not seek out Lady Margaret or any of her guards. She walked directly up the winding stone staircase to the Alpha and Luna's private chambers. The fire in the hearth was dying, casting long, melancholy shadows across the massive 4-poster bed they had shared. The bed where he had whispered sweet words that she now knew were nothing but dutiful lies. Evelyn moved with military efficiency. She pulled a worn leather satchel from the bottom of a heavy oak chest. She did not pack the emerald velvet gowns, the silk ribbons, or the fur-lined boots Cedric had bought her. She packed the things she had brought with her from the Riverlands. 2 simple woolen dresses, a pair of sturdy worn leather riding boots, a flint and steel, a waterskin. She walked over to her vanity mirror. She stared at her reflection. Her face was pale, but her dark eyes were strikingly clear. Her hands were perfectly steady. She reached up and unclasped the heavy silver chain around her neck, the Ironcrest mating necklace, bearing the crest of a snarling wolf. She let it pool onto the mahogany wood of the vanity with a soft metallic clink. Next came the Luna's diadem, placed gently beside the necklace. Finally, she slid the silver mating band from her left ring finger. It felt strangely heavy as she set it down next to the other jewelry. She was leaving nothing of Ironcrest behind, and she was taking nothing of Ironcrest with her. Lastly, she strapped her mother's hunting dagger to her thigh and pulled a heavy, dark grey traveller's cloak over her shoulders, pulling the hood deep over her face. The castle was distracted by the feast and the storm. The guards at the postern gate, a small hidden exit, meant for servants and discreet movements, were huddled around a brazier, nursing flasks of ale to fend off the bitter cold. Evelyn knew their patrol rotations perfectly. She had designed them herself to optimize security. She slipped past them through the shadows like a ghost, easing the heavy iron-bound door open just enough to squeeze through. The wind hit her instantly, a brutal freezing slap to the face. The blizzard was in full force, blinding white snow swirling in chaotic vortexes. For a normal human, stepping into this storm would mean certain death. But Evelyn was a wolf of the riverlands, raised in the wild currents and harsh terrain of the untamed borders. She stood at the edge of the tree line looking back at the towering black silhouette of Ironcrest Keep. The lights from the great hall still glowed warmly in the distance. Cedric was in there. Genevieve was in there. Evelyn took a deep breath of the freezing air. It burned her lungs, but it felt cleaner than the air inside the keep had felt in years. She had given Cedric everything, and he had looked at his beta and called her a tactic. She turned her back on the keep. She didn't look back. She didn't cry. She simply stepped into the howling maw of the winter storm, letting the heavy snow erase her footprints before they could even settle. By the time the sun rose, Evelyn of the Riverlands would be gone. The morning sun clawed its way over the jagged peaks of the northern mountains, casting a harsh, blinding glare across the snow-choked courtyard of Ironcrest Keep. Inside the great hall, the remnants of the solstice feast lay in ruins, half-eaten roasts, spilled wine staining the tapestries, and the lingering scent of wood smoke and sweat. Arthur Cedric woke with a pounding ache in his temples, the heavy velvet curtains of his guest quarters drawn tight. He had not returned to the Alpha's chambers last night. After his conversation with Leith, a profound sense of cowardice had gripped him. He hadn't wanted to face Evelyn's steady, knowing eyes while the scent of Genevieve's perfume still lingered on his tunic. He had chosen a lesser room, convincing himself he was simply sparing his mate from his own chaotic thoughts. When he finally pushed open the heavy oak door of his primary bedchamber, the silence hit him first. It was a hollow, echoing stillness. The fire in the hearth had burned down to fine grey ash. The air was uncharacteristically frigid. "Aveline?" Cedric called out, his voice thick with sleep. He expected to see her sitting by the window, a ledger in her lap, already managing the winter rations. The room was empty. Frowning, Cedric stepped further inside. That was when the glint of silver caught his eye. There, resting precisely in the center of Aveline's mahogany vanity, lay the Ironcrest diadem. Beside it, coiled like a dead snake, was the heavy silver mating necklace. And resting within the center of the chain was her wedding band. Cedric's heart stopped. The breath vanished from his lungs, as if he had been punched in the chest. He lunged toward the vanity, his large hands trembling as he stared down at the discarded metal. Before his panic could fully materialize, the door burst open. Leif stood in the threshold, his face ashen, holding something bulky in his arms. It was Cedric's heavy wolf pelt cloak. "Roderick found this," Leif said, his voice completely devoid of its usual steady calm. "Folded neatly on the bench outside the armory, exactly where we were standing last night." Cedric stared at the cloak, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together with violent, agonizing clarity. Evelyn is a pragmatic woman. She was a survival tactic. "She was never really my choice. She heard us," Cedric whispered, the horror creeping up his throat, choking him. "Goddess above, she heard every word." "Her horse is gone from the stables," Leif continued mercilessly, stepping into the room. "The guards at the postern gate reported nothing, but you know Evelyn. If she wanted to slip out unseen, she would. The snowstorm has buried any tracks." "She's gone, Cedric." A desperate, primal roar tore from Cedric's throat. He swept his arm across the vanity, sending the silver jewelry clattering to the stone floor. He had been a fool, an arrogant, blinded fool playing with ghosts while the woman who held his actual life together slipped through his fingers. Within the hour, Ironcrest was in chaos. Tracking parties were dispatched, but the blizzard had wiped the mountains clean. As Cedric stood in the courtyard, screaming orders at his bewildered soldiers, Lady Genevieve glided out of the keep, wrapped in white furs. "Cedric, darling, whatever is the matter?" she asked, her voice laced with a sickly sweetness that, for the first time, grated against his ears. "Why are your men riding out into the drifts?" "Evelyn is gone," Cedric snarled, his amber eyes frantic as he strapped his sword belt to his waist. "She left in the night." Genevieve's ice-blue eyes widened, but a flash of something else, triumph, perhaps, or relief, darted across her face. "Left, but how dreadful. The cold is unforgiving." Still, Cedric, if she abandoned her pack so easily, perhaps she was never truly fit to be your Luna. She stepped closer, placing a gloved hand on his chest. "We are here now, High Ridge and Ironcrest. We can finally be what we were meant to be." Cedric looked down at her. The intoxicating haze of the previous night had vanished, burned away by the icy reality of Evelyn's absence. He looked at Genevieve and saw not the lost love of his youth, but a stranger. "What do you mean?" Cedric asked slowly. Genevieve sighed, feigning a look of burden. "My father, Lord Alistair, is ailing. And, well, High Ridge is not as prosperous as it appears. We took heavy loans from the merchants of House Ashford to maintain our estates. We are drowning in debt, Cedric. But when we heard how wealthy Ironcrest had become, how your granaries burst and your vaults overflowed, my father knew it was time to renew our bond. With your wealth and my bloodline, we would be unstoppable." The confession hit Cedric like a physical blow. The twist of the knife was almost poetic. Genevieve hadn't come for love. She hadn't come because her wolf howled for him. She had come because she was bankrupt. She was looking for a survival tactic. And the wealth she was so eager to claim, Evelyn built it. Evelyn had negotiated the trade routes, balanced the ledgers and rationed the grain. Evelyn had turned a dying keep into a fortress of prosperity. Cedric shoved Genevieve away, his expression twisting in absolute disgust. "Get out of my courtyard," he practically growled, his wolf clawing at the surface of his skin. "Cedric, pack your things and leave Ironcrest by midday, or I will have Leaf throw you off the mountain himself," he roared. As Genevieve scrambled backward, her aristocratic mask crumbling into fear, Cedric dropped to his knees in the freezing snow. The bitter irony tasted like ash in his mouth. He had thrown away a diamond because he was mesmerized by the glitter of cheap glass. And the diamond had not even cried. She had just left. 7 months passed. To say Ironcrest suffered would be an understatement. Without Aveline's meticulous administration, the trade treaties with the southern merchants fractured. The winter stores were mismanaged, leading to near riots among the lower dens. Cedric was a brilliant military commander, but he was no governor. Every ledger he stared at felt like a mocking reminder of the woman he had betrayed. He was a shell of a man, haunted by the memory of a heavy fur cloak folded neatly on a wooden bench. Rumors eventually reached the northern mountains. Evelyn had not run back to her father, Lord Ewan, in disgrace. Instead, she had traveled east to the Obsidian Valley, neutral territory governed by Packmaster Garrick, a formidable, solitary alpha known for his ironclad banking and heavily fortified trade cities. Cedric did not send an emissary. He rode out himself, accompanied only by Leaf. He would swallow his pride. He would beg on his knees in the mud if he had to. He would bring his Luna home. The fortress of Obsidian Valley was entirely different from the crude stone of Ironcrest. It was a marvel of engineering, carved directly into the black rock of the mountains, bustling with merchants, artisans, and heavily armed guards in polished black armor. When Cedric was finally granted an audience, he was led into a massive, sunlit solarium overlooking the valley. He expected to find Packmaster Garrick, Instead, sitting at a massive mahogany desk covered in maps and scrolls was Evelyn. Cedric's breath hitched. She was breathtaking. The simple woolen dresses were gone, replaced by an impeccably tailored gown of deep crimson and gold. Her raven hair was braided with pearls, and the dark circles of exhaustion that had perpetually haunted her eyes in Ironcrest were gone. She looked radiant. She looked powerful. "Arthur Cedric," Aveline said, her voice smooth, calm, and utterly detached. She did not stand. She merely set down her quill. "To what do I owe the honor of Ironcrest's presence in my administrative halls?" "Aveline," Cedric breathed out, taking a step forward before two massive obsidian guards crossed their halberds, blocking his path. He swallowed hard. I came to bring you home." Aveline tilted her head slightly, a polite, mildly amused smile touching her lips. "Home? My home is right here, Cedric." Packmaster Garrick recognized my talents with logistics and trade. "I am now the High Treasurer of the Obsidian Valley, a position that requires my full attention." "You are my mate," Cedric pleaded, his voice cracking. He ignored the guards, his eyes fixed desperately on hers. "You are the Luna of Ironcrest." "Aveline, I was a fool. I was drunk on nostalgia and the solstice wine. Genevieve meant nothing to me. I threw her out the very next day. It is you I need. It has always been you." Leaf stood silently behind his alpha, his eyes downcast in shame. Aveline's expression didn't shift. There was no anger, no vindictive joy, no sorrow. There was only the cold, unyielding pragmatism of a woman who had thoroughly excised a tumor from her life. "You did not speak of nostalgia in the armory that night, Cedric," she said softly, her words echoing loudly in the quiet room. "You spoke of duty. You called me a survival tactic." Cedric flinched as if struck. "I was trying to placate Leif. I was a coward." "You were honest," Aveline corrected him, her tone firm. "For 3 years I poured my blood, my sweat, and my youth into the foundation of your pack. I loved you, Cedric. Truly I did. I thought we were building an empire together, but you showed me that I was merely the mortar you used to hold your walls up until you felt strong enough to reach for what you actually wanted. I want you." He yelled, tears finally spilling hot and bitter down his weathered cheeks. "Please, I am begging you. Ironcrest is falling apart without you." "I am falling apart." Aveline stood up. She walked around the desk, her crimson skirts rustling against the marble floor. She approached the guards and gently pushed their halberds aside, stepping right up to Cedric. He looked down at her with desperate, hungry eyes, praying she would reach up and touch his face, praying for the forgiveness she had always offered. Instead, Aveline reached into the folds of her gown and pulled out a thick roll of parchment bound in a heavy black wax seal. She pressed it into his chest. "What is this?" Cedric whispered. "A formal severance of our treaty, sanctioned by Packmaster Garrick and my father," Aveline replied, taking a deliberate step back. "Your debts to the Riverlands are forgiven. The mate bond is officially dissolved by the laws of the High Council. You are a free man, Cedric. You no longer have to settle for your second choice." "No," Cedric choked out, letting the scroll fall to the floor. "I won't accept this." "You don't have to accept it for it to be true," Aveline said, turning her back on him and walking back to her desk. "You taught me a very valuable lesson, Alpha. You taught me my worth. I will never again be someone's survival tactic. I'm the architect of my own fate." She sat down, picking up her quill once more. "Guards, please escort Lord Cedric and Beta Leaf to the gates. They have a long ride back to their winter." "Aveline, please." "Don't do this." Cedric fought against the guards as they seized his arms, dragging him backward toward the heavy iron doors. "Aveline." She didn't look up. She didn't flinch at his screams. She merely dipped her quill in the inkwell and returned to her ledgers, her hand perfectly steady. She had not cried when she learned she was unloved, and she certainly would not cry now that she was free. And that is the brutal truth of the mate bond. Sometimes the greatest act of love you can give yourself is the courage to simply walk away. What would you have done in Evelyn's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. If you felt every ounce of this betrayal, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more epic romance dramas.